Her predecessor was Hugh Van Lay, who is now the current Governor of South Australia. Professor Wilson was born in Wales and she migrated with her parents and sisters to Australia in 1959. Her early career began in nursing, where she first graduated in 1976 as a general nurse from the Royal Adelaide Hospital. And she subsequently trained as an intensive and coronary care nurse in 1978 and then completed a diploma in applied science in 1982. Professor Wilson was awarded professorial status at Flinders University in 2000 and University of South Australia in 2015. She's held several leadership positions in the not-for-profit sector and the health industry, including her most recent role as Chief Executive of the Cancer Council of South Australia. And previously, she was the Executive Director of Nursing and Patient Services at Flinders Medical, Executive Director of Nursing at the Lyell McEwen Health Service, and Director and Chief Executive of the Hampstead Rehabilitation Service. Professor Wilson has worked in London at Guy's and the London hospitals. She's a Fellow of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, a Fellow of the Australasian College of Health Services Executive, and a Fellow of the Australian College of Nursing. She holds a Bachelor of Business and a Master of Business Administration, and she's a graduate and Fellow of the Wharton School of Management in Pennsylvania, USA. She was a winner in the South Australian Telstra Business Awards in 2000 and 1999, a Johnson & Johnson Wharton Fellow for Executives Program in Management. She's currently a board member of the Hutt Street Centre, the ACH Group, the Northern Adelaide Local Health Network Governing Council and Flinders University Council. She's a former director of the University of South Australia MBA Advisory Board and the Burnside Hospital. Rotarians and guests, a great pleasure to welcome to the podium a woman whose achievements epitomises what Australian International Women's Day really celebrates. So please welcome the Lieutenant Governor of South Australia, Professor Brenda Wilson.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth and David, for your welcome today. And welcome to all the Rotarians and guests in the room. It's a great honour to be invited to speak at this important event. And of course, it marks International Women's Day, which, as most of you in the room will know, was celebrated around the world yesterday on March the 8th. And having become a grandmother to Charlotte, or Lottie as we call her, now 12 days old, I'm reminded how important gender parity and closing the gap is. And whilst both parents, my son and daughter-in-law, are fortunate to have been educated, they're both still working out how they will juggle work, make sure Lottie is well cared for, and still achieve their goals and ambitions, it seems, aiming for gender parity. Events such as this provide an opportunity to celebrate social, economic, cultural and political achievements of women, as well as ensuring we remain aware that progress to accelerate gender parity in many places across the world still requires urgent action. I note also that diversity is a core value of Rotary and acknowledge the significant efforts to provide aspiring men and women with equal and greater access to networking and mentoring with business and community leaders. This is to be commended. In my address today, I thought I would talk about gender parity and address three things: what it means to achieve gender parity, who benefits from gender parity, and how we can all take action. So firstly, what does it mean to achieve gender parity? Well, essentially what we are saying is that we will have achieved gender parity when all forms of discrimination against all women and girls, everywhere in the world, and is non-existent in the world in which we live. What we mean by that is men and women will have equal access to education. Men and women will be paid equally for the same work, with equal numbers of men and women having access to leadership positions, where women no longer spend 3 times the amount of time spent engaged in domestic and care work. And when I made this note, I was thinking about my husband. And I think I learned to clean the house when I was at least 8 or 9 or 10 years old. He's 63 and he still doesn't know how. So we think we've come a long way, but I'm not sure we have. So when men and women have equal legal rights with the same inheritance rights for daughters and sons, where men and women have equal political representation, and globally the number of women in ministerial and parliamentary roles will be greater than the current 22% that of men. Where all countries have domestic violence legislation and that this legislation is eventually irrelevant. Where all forms of violence against women are eliminated, including trafficking and sexual and other types of exploitation, such as child, early and forced marriage and female genital mutilation, with access to good maternal and reproductive health. And when women have equal rights to economic resources, as well as access to ownership and control over land and other forms of property, financial services in accordance with national laws. And where women have equal access to digital services and enabling technology, in particular information and communication technology, which promotes the empowerment of women. So in summary, we have some way to go, and when we will have achieved gender parity, when the world's attention has focused on gender inequality, to achieve the same benefits for boys and girls, and men and women, and for making equal contributions in the world. So secondly, who benefits from gender parity, and why would we bother? Well, we'll all benefit. Gender parity is linked to economic prosperity. If full parity were to be achieved, the contribution of women to the global GDP growth would double between now and 2025. Adding as much as $28 trillion or 26% to the global economy. To put this in perspective, this is roughly the combined size of the economies of the United States and China today. Women's advancement and leadership are central to business performance and economic prosperity, with numerous global studies on the impact of women in leadership reveal the following findings. Women are the largest emerging market in the world. More equality achieves a higher gross domestic product, and more equality achieves more productivity. Better gender balance on boards achieves better share price and financial performance, and more gender balanced leadership achieves better all-round performance, and more women political leaders achieve more prosperity. So thirdly, how can we all take action? Well, the World Economic Forum estimates at the current rates of change, gender parity will not be achieved until 2133. What I found most interesting about this statistic is that, think about your own investments. Any business imperative offering these returns wouldn't wait 117 years to implement, so why are we waiting for this one? So some of the things we can do: to make career opportunities more visible to women, to speed up the culture change with progressive corporate policy, such as paternity leave and flexible working arrangements, and build supportive environments and work to eliminate conscious and unconscious bias. And make no mistake, these biases are also exhibited by women. One of the worst bosses I've ever had was a female. A survey of men and women leaders in 400 countries around the world sought to identify the biggest barriers and accelerators to women's career advancement, and showed the following key findings. Men and women alike agree that more female leadership leads to stronger companies. 64% of high-performing companies reported that men and women have equal influence on strategy in their organisations, compared to in the lower-performing companies. Men are aware of the unconscious bias in the workplace that holds women back, which means we can now spend more time identifying and eradicating it. In my own social environment, I still see young men expected to provide for their families, women and babies not having access to the necessary supports which enable them to get back to work early and achieve their goals. In fact, I don't know if any of you have read Bertrand Russell, a British philosopher who lived in 1872 to 1970, and I was reading one of his books the other day, and he suggested that we should all work fewer hours, say no more than 4 hours a day, of course without a pay cut. In his view, this would create more jobs, reduce unemployment, and stimulate the economy. In addition, we'd create more communal spaces, thereby reducing household duties, fewer kitchens and living spaces to clean. He suggests society would also benefit from creating the opportunity to leave our children for the 4 hours we were at work in the care of people specifically trained to educate and care for children. He espoused these ideas more than 60 years ago. And I know what you're thinking. While this may not be everybody's idea of the best way to live, it does provoke thought about how to reduce cleaning and childcare and not compromise the outcomes we're all here to achieve. And that is healthy, happy, well-educated children and men and women competing equally to achieve their aspirations. I witnessed recently a couple where the husband in the family supported the family financially. He'd made quite a lot of money. His wife had raised their 4 children, now in their 20s. She'd earned no money in her life and was completely dependent on him. While on the face of it, this should not be criticised, but she always felt she could have achieved more. He subtly, or perhaps not so subtly, exercised power over her in decision-making and often criticised and disagreed with her. It seems exerting this kind of power and control suits some men who may be intimidated by women in different circumstances. In fact, it reminded me of a quote, and I'll get her name wrong, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and she said, "Of course, I'm not worried about intimidating men. The type of man who will be intimidated is exactly the man I have no interest in." She's a writer who believes we teach girls to shrink themselves, to make themselves smaller. She believes we say to girls, you can have ambition, but not too much. You should aim to be successful, but not too successful. Otherwise, you would threaten the man. Recently, I was at dinner with friends, and we were discussing the movie Suffragettes. One of the men at the table said he wasn't going to see it, because he's sick of all that stuff, and added, "We've all had enough of it. Why would I go and see a movie about it?" And given I'm older now and hopefully a bit wiser, I chose not to overreact, but simply laughed and said, "Get used to it. There's a whole lot more to come." Each of us can be a leader within our own spheres of influence and commit to take pragmatic action to accelerate gender parity. And globally, with individuals pledging to move from talk to purposeful action, and with men and women joining forces, we can collectively help women advance equal to their numbers and realise the limitless potential they offer economies all over the world. We have urgent work to do. Are you ready to accelerate gender parity? So just to summarise, we've talked about what it means to achieve gender parity, who benefits from gender parity, and how we can all take action. The most important thing men can do is work for the empowerment of women. The most important thing women do in leadership positions is to support women. Gender equality is as much a cause for men as it is for women. The evidence is clear, and how we all gain and how we all grow socially, economically, politically, and even in a deeper sense, psychologically, from women's empowerment and gender equality in our everyday lives. So in closing, I thought I would leave you with 4 quotes from 4 exceptional women. The first one, Moula Lezouzé, she said, "Extremists have shown what frightens them the most, a girl with a book." Hillary Rodham Clinton said, "Women are the largest untapped reservoir of talent in the world." Golda Meir said, "Whether women are better than men I cannot say, but I can say they are certainly no worse." And Gloria Steinem said, "Some of us are becoming the man we want to marry." And I hope my mother's not in the room. She also said, "A liberated woman is one who has sex before marriage and a job after." Thank you.
That, as riveting as I did, we do have a roving mic, and if there are any questions in the room, I think Professor Wilson will be happy to take them. Anybody game? Yes, we have Peter Neal.
Thank you, Professor. That was insightful, informative and enthralling. This week, in the fight for equity and equality, it seemed that the price of admission was to declare oneself as a feminist. Would you care to comment?
So just so I understand the question, are you saying that women expect you to declare yourself as a feminist?
I think so on Q&A the other evening.
Oh, yes, okay. No, but I probably don't share that view. I mean, I don't think one has to label oneself. I think what each of us should do is understand that we live in a society where we don't even realise sometimes that we're not, or that we're being sexist, or the bit of an old terminology in my view. I mean, I think seriously it's about recognising that men and women compete equally in the world, and that we should encourage equally both of them to do that, so that they both have equal opportunity to do what they want to do. I don't really think one has to label oneself as a feminist to achieve that.
I think Brenda and I come from the same era where feminism wasn't just about gender equality. We covered racial equality, the whole cultural boundaries. I think it's only in recent years that I've seen it being labelled mainly feminism attached to gender. For me, it's about equal opportunity for everybody in our society, people with disability, people from different races. It shouldn't just be a label attached, as it has become, to gender. Are there any more questions? No? Oh yes, Frank, here we go. I might have to translate this one.
Thank you, Professor, for a very insightful talk. I'll try to frame this question in, we see the world through a Western prism. And so feminism and equal opportunity and all the other issues that are contentious in our society, we try to impose on the world, and we call it human rights. There are many cultures who don't see the world through this prism. So how do you reconcile cultural differences with Western values?
Is my friend Kathy Branson in the room? Because she'd help me answer that question. Look, I think it's about education. And I think that whilst we've got a long way to go in this country, there are many other countries that have much further to go. In fact, I was reading or listening to the radio the other day, and they were talking about if you want to get a divorce in some of the Arabian countries, you just have to say to your wife 3 times, I'm getting a divorce, I'm getting a divorce, I'm getting a divorce, or I'm divorcing you, I'm divorcing you, I'm divorcing you. And it was saying in this article that I was reading that he can do that just before he's about to engage with another woman. And then she's out, she has no income, she has no way of supporting herself. I mean, I thought that was pretty horrendous. I think the other interesting thing was I was reading about Uber taxis, and it's going to be interesting when we have driverless cars, because in some countries women are not able to drive. A man has to drive them to where they want to go. But with Uber now, some of these women can actually get in the vehicle and go to where they want to go, but they're struggling with it to see whether that's actually acceptable or not. So I think it's about education, and I really don't know, I'm not an expert on that area, but it's certainly about people understanding that women are not to be feared, they're to be embraced.
Yes, we have another question from Barbara Durham.
Thank you, Barbara Durham. Some 10 years ago, I had the opportunity to go into Brunei to talk to young Muslim women on women in business. I was amazed that in Brunei, that the guys can have 3 wives. What's your view on that?
Oh, well, as long as we can have 3 husbands, I suppose it's fine. No, on a more serious note, I mean, that comes from the old days, actually, I think, when people were... I mean, I was reading some... Are there any anthropologists in the room? Someone will be able to tell you that I think it comes from the days when there were fewer men around because they'd been to war, so the women had to kind of share him. So I personally don't support it. I think it's unequal. That's my personal view, for what it's worth.
Sandra. Lisa Hosking.
Hi, thank you, Professor. A fantastic talk today. I wonder if you have any comments on how women might be able to, after taking career breaks, to have children or perhaps change careers, how there's a way of making up for what they have lost in that time to be able to gain that equality in terms of their work and their experience, and taking advantage of the experience they've had during the career break.
I mean, that's an incredibly complex question, and there are lots of people trying to address those issues. It's about providing adequate childcare. It's about reframing it and rethinking about how we can support women to stay at home for the period of time they need to, because we know if babies are breastfed and looked after and nurtured, they have huge health benefits later in life. So it's about enabling women, if they want to go back to work sooner rather than later, to be able to do that and still be able to breastfeed their children. There are lots of things that companies can do to support women, but I think national policies need to be embraced. I mean, I have a daughter-in-law who's a paediatrician, and she has just had her first baby, and she is looking at how long she can have off work before she goes back. She's just finished her exam, she's incredibly well educated, and she feels the pressure to go back to work. The supports aren't there in big hospitals where she works. So it's not a very simple answer. There are lots of structural changes and policy changes that need to occur for women to be able to compete equally. And of course, we should mention that men haven't always been the carers. So it's about giving equal opportunity for men to stay at home and not be viewed as wusses if they stay at home to look after children. That it's an important part of child rearing to have a male and a female, or supportive environments for children to grow up in. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Wilson. We've really enjoyed... Oh, I think we have one more from a Rotaractor. Costa. He's president of the Rotaract Club. Welcome, Costa.
Of Adelaide University. Speaking from the younger generation, there is...
Makes you say that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
There's a lot of misinformation these days coming from the internet, and a lot of people that say that they're experts in the ideas of feminism, equality, and they're quite not. Especially me, knowing friends from university, all in engineering, quite misogynistic men that really push certain ideas because they just have misinformation, but because they have enough of it, a lot of the other guys and girls in those social circles can't really stand up against them because they just don't have channels and pathways of correct education or information. Where would you normally go to get this information apart from studying a course in gender politics or gender studies? That's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. Of course, that is one way of becoming educated, but it's about our leaders, our business leaders, community leaders. It's about developing policy. It's about putting structural changes in place so that it pervades our society. Of course, all engineers aren't like that. I mean, I have a son who's an aerospace engineer, and I have taught him that any women that he might marry are not going to be ones that are going to do his washing and ironing. So he knows how to do his washing and ironing and cook, unlike his father. So there are ways that as women we can teach our sons, even if they are engineers, that they can actually they don't have to be misogynist. So no, well, and in fact, I know two of his very close friends who are women engineers as well. So we brought our boys up to embrace gender diversity without calling it that. And but you can't do it only in your families at home. You have to. It has to be structural.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate very much that you've made yourself available today. We have certainly had a lot of food for thought in this speech that you've given to us, and I hope as a Rotary Club and as Rotarians and as our guests will learn, now that we also have women in Rotary, and it hasn't always been that way, but I think being an international community organisation, we as Rotarians can do a lot to improve the gender diversity around the world, and I thank you very much. And I have a very highly prized Rotary gift for you.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.